Welcome to Point of Jew. I'm Jeremy Hirsch, and happy Halloween, or thereabouts, or almost. I'm recording this 2 weeks beforehand anyway, so who knows? But tonight's guest, really excited about the hosts of Terror InPodnito, Sam Berson and Palmer Sturman. Tremendous guys. Palmer is one of the reasons that this podcast is actually on a bunch of different platforms because he helped me out with some logo work in terms of resizing those to get me on iTunes and Google Play. So owe him a lot. And then Sam I've known for a really long time. Actually used to be my sound engineer when I did a podcast called Speechbox, which was more comic book and comic book TV based, which was fun. And I'm sure that exists somewhere on YouTube in the ethers. I think the channel still exists. So I don't know, go watch past episodes of that too, just for more consumption. Meant to do this not too long ago. I received Tommy Siegel's book. I hope this helps. It's actually really awesome. And I know I said that on the podcast, but I actually have it now in my hands to be able to show you. And I recommend ordering it. The links are all over the Facebook page. So check those out. Check out Tommy Siegel's page. Can pick it up there in one of his albums, but really cool. Glad that this actually finally came and I've been enjoying it. I'm about halfway through. Really, really fun comics and some good insights from the mind of Tommy Siegel. Also tonight, I'm just like Mary Poppins or at an Oprah show pulling things from under my seat. Giving away the Baby Yoda. At the end of the show tonight, I will do a little drawing, about a little spinny wheel program to pick you at random. I'll reach out. We'll do a handoff or I'll mail it to you. Feel like most of my listeners are in the general vicinity, but we got a few out-of-state people. That keeps growing. Some of you I don't know. You know, can always shout me a holler, message me, email me. Feedback for how the show's going, what you do enjoy, what you don't enjoy. Probably some of these, right? Who knows? But really excited for you to listen to this episode. Sam and Palmer get to go into their podcast, movies, and the horror genre specifically, talking about what they like out of that, you know, some things that they've reviewed. And then also because they're in a metal band as well together, talking about their band Holden. So a couple different avenues that we get to go down. So it's kind of a very varied show with those two guys. I have not interviewed two people before at once. I think ever. I don't think even when I used to host, like I hosted Virginia Commonwealth University's news show. Good Lord, that's like almost 2 decades ago. So I feel super old, but I don't think I've ever interviewed two people at once. So try to give balance, but just interesting. And we had some technical snafus with Zoom. So did the best that we could with that. Those two guys were just tremendous bearing with me. And I really think you'll enjoy just what we talked about. I think you'll enjoy their stories. And there's some good advice in there too. So without further ado, Point of Jew. All right, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Point of Jew. I have with me another Jew and Sam Berson.
What up?
What up, Sam? And Palmer, they are the hosts of the horror podcast Terror InPodnito. And guys, thank you so much for actually making some time and coming on this podcast.
Yeah, of course. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, is it weird being somebody else dictating the pace of the podcast or what have you, or
it's kind of nice actually.
It's a refreshing change of pace.
Yeah.
Not to have to pull the content out of your asses, right? It's better when somebody else has to come up with a little bit of everything.
Yeah,
I didn't even have to write any notes. That was nice.
Yeah, it's really great not having to do any prep and just opening a few beers and kicking back. This is gonna be great.
I don't come up with anything too crazy. I always hope that every show, in all honesty. But so you guys have been friends for a while. You have some other endeavors too. But how did this podcast come about? Obviously, you guys have a lot of passion for horror. But how kind of what's the making of? How did this all percolate in your minds?
Well,
so I wasn't even included on the beginning of it.
Yeah.
Oh, damn.
Yeah. The podcast started off because a mutual friend of ours, Alex, and I were getting really shit-faced one night. I think it was like 3:00 in the morning. We were by our bonfire, the bonfire in my backyard, and I don't know, it was just probably like 2 cases of beer in, and we both just kind of looked at each other because we were having a conversation about I honestly can't even remember what horror movie it was, but we were both just like, hey, we should just start a podcast about this. You and I really enjoy talking about this, and let's see if other people want to listen to it too. And so it just started with me and Alex. And Sam, Sam's always kind of been the car for our horror conversations.
I make a good third wheel.
Yeah, he like it's pretty much one of those, like, I would say shit that I've seen and then loan it to Sam. What was one of the first ones I loaned you? I think High Tension was like one of the first ones I loaned you.
You spent like 6 months trying to get me to watch that movie.
Yeah, and then I finally loaned it to you, and you were like, actually, that was a really good movie, except for the ending.
Yeah.
So he's always been kind of like along for the ride on this whole thing. And as soon as Alex and we got what, 2-3 episodes deep, and then we were finally like, hey, let's have Sam on this.
It was 6 episodes, because that's when you guys started doing the Christmas stuff and invited me in, because the movie that we did that week was I can't remember the name of it, but it's got William Shatner as the DJ.
William Shatner's a random DJ?
Yeah, he's like an extra in the film. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head either, which, is fantastic for two horror hosts that should know a lot about things, but it is what it is.
I'm watching so much stuff right now that it's hard for me to remember anything that's older than like 8 months.
Yeah, my brain's fried at this point. Halloween is just like as you can imagine, it's content overload for our podcast.
It's a Christmas Horror Story, I think is what it was.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah. William Shatner was the DJ through all that, and yeah. What a bizarre film.
Yeah.
How do you guys pick what films that you're gonna review or go into? Like, is there certain criteria? I was trying to look to see if there was any connecting dots, but you guys seem to span across everything. So what goes into that selection process?
Well, we used to actually curate it a lot more than we do now. We used to pick like a theme each month, and then we would collectively nominate films internally in that theme. If we couldn't whittle them down to 4 ourselves, we'd turn to the fans and say, hey, out of these couple, what do you guys feel like us talking about? We since I've became a dad, since Sam's expecting, since Alex became a mom, we've gone from doing the weekly format to doing like a bi-weekly format, just because we don't have the time anymore.
Damn those meddling kids.
Yeah, right. And so it's gotten less curated as time has gone on. Now it's basically just like whatever catches our fancy that might be newer. Is basically what we've been sticking with as of late. We still are trying to keep like certain traditions. Like for Christmas every year, we've done a sequel to Silent Night, Deadly Night, and I think this year's part 4, right? Yeah. So we're keeping that tradition, but there's certain things we're keeping alive. And there will be times, I think, where we will visit themes again. But yeah, we used to just kind of pick like a dead set theme, and it was basically like, it usually had to do with the month, whatever it was. Like when a Women's History Month was a big one for us, so we'd always pick like strong female leads. And then what else?
We had some fun ones with that too. I think that's when we did I think the first time we did that one was we opened it with Revenge.
Yeah.
That was always a fun month.
And
yeah.
Or anything like that?
What's that?
For that, I was wondering if you guys did like I Spit on Your Grave or anything like that.
No. We actually haven't tackled that or the remake on the podcast yet. I think we had talked about doing that we did like 1 month that was like nothing but extreme horror films.
Yep.
And we were talking about throwing that one on the list, but believe it or not, there's a lot more extreme than I Spit on Your Grave out there these days.
I believe it. I will say I adore movies. I mean, obviously everybody's got their favorite genre. I am not good with being scared or horror or gore or anything of the sort. So that
right.
My least informed genre is horror. So I'm somewhat sad to say.
So I'm working my way through it right now. Amazon has the Blumhouse partnership where they're releasing like 2 groups of 4 movies that are all genre movies. I just finished the second one. I assume you watched Black Mirror?
Me?
Yeah, maybe. I feel like everybody watched Black Mirror, at least
I've seen
some of
of
it.
Black Mirror. My wife loves Black Mirror. I've
Okay.
seen some of it. I mean, I've liked what I've seen. You know, it reminds me of the Twilight Zone, which I did watch back as a child.
Okay. Yeah. So I feel, and I've had this conversation a bunch of times about, because my wife hates horror movies unless it involves sharks, and most of my family hates horror movies, in general. But I feel like it doesn't have to be bloody or gory or super violent or crazy like that to be a good horror movie. So these new ones on Amazon are actually kind of like right in that wheelhouse where it's more like suspense and thriller.
I'd
But
actually venture as to say that like Extreme Horror Month that we did was like some of the worst movies I think we've all collectively covered.
yeah, I mean, because that's the thing. Sometimes you get into that realm where it's just like violence and nastiness for the sake of violence and nastiness.
I just like can't do like the torture porn and stuff like that. That's just...
Yeah, like the Poughkeepsie tapes, like that was probably the best out of all of the ones we watched.
Yeah, we watched some pretty sadistic shit for that month. August Underground. We had
Yeah.
a Serbian film. We
Oh,
had
that's a funny movie.
that movie. It's a black comedy through and through.
What for each of you guys, Sam, I'll let you start and then go to Palmer, but what goes into what makes a great horror movie to you? Like what's your taste in that? And then you could throw out a couple examples of like, all right, this is my top shelf, this is my shit for horror films.
So I think it depends on the type of horror movie. Like the three of us all have different tastes for like what we like. Palmer's really into like the body horror stuff, and like he's a big fan of Cronenberg's work. I like my favorite genre tends to be more in the like horror comedy vein. Um, but again, like it's easy for stuff like that to end up being really derivative. Um, I feel like it's especially hard to do these days when the 90s were like the late 90s and the early 2000s, the time frame where Palmer likes to pretend never happened.
What is that decade? I don't understand.
They got so meta with the horror movies, just kind of like this just what the hell is that actor's name in Scream that talks about the rules for horror movies? Jamie Kennedy. Jamie Kennedy's role in that movie was so meta that and like fourth wall breaking that it's hard to make like meta commentary horror movies these days and not just come off as like a cheap clone or ripoff. And then as far as like the horror comedy aspect goes, there's good ones that pop up every now and then. But for example, the one that just came out was a sequel to The Babysitter. So The Babysitter 2 Killer Queen. That movie is jammed with so many references to other horror movies that I lost count like halfway through. And it lost the feel that the first one had. So it's tough. My biggest thing in, if you're not going for like a straight slasher movie, and even if you are, because it was my issue with the remake of Halloween, was just don't be derivative. Don't just pay fan service, because if I wanted to watch other movies, I'd watch the other movies. As far as the stuff that I consider top shelf, like Scream is definitely up there for me. I know Palmer won't agree with it. But that's the one that like really got me into horror movies.
I actually have seen that. My wife forced me to see that on like
See,
one
there
of
you
the
go.
times we hung out. And
Your wife sounds like an amazing person.
She is absolutely better than me at all facets.
I mean, I feel like all three of us can say that. And if
Yeah.
Alex was able to join us tonight, she'd probably say that she's better than her husband too. And I think that's just like a natural fact of life.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I mean, they're called our better halves for a reason.
Yeah.
Well, they tolerate us, so I mean, you can't ask for better than that.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, first off, yes, Sam, I put down Scream regularly, but that's because it's part of a decade that I refuse to acknowledge. And don't let me take away from your love of that movie just because
I won't.
I'm an elitist asshole. For me, It's yeah, Sam brought up some of my favorites. I'm a huge Cronenberg fan. I love stuff that or horror films that give you something to chew on after they're finished. And I don't really care how they get there, but I want to leave the movie stunned. Films like, you know, The Fly, films like, and it can be for any other, it doesn't necessarily have to be because of it's presenting something poignant in terms of script. It could be just pure amazing prosthetic effects. It could be something I've never seen done in terms of cinematography. It can be any number of things, but the movies that I love the most, kind of in general, are the ones that when you leave the theater or when you finish watching them, if you turn them off, they leave you with a lot to think about. And I mean, like sometimes it's mental stuff. The one that immediately jumps to mind, some of the French extremist films that we've covered, a lot of them kind of delve into those just like very deep existential circumstances that we all read about in high school that I'm still a sucker for in my mid 30s, to stuff that you know just leaves your jaw on the floor for completely different reasons. Yeah, I mean, some of my favorites, definitely, like I said, The Fly. I love Reanimator. That's more of a horror comedy, but that's pretty much because I love everything that director's ever done.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. I span a whole wide variety of things, and I say that, but then, you know, some of my other most endearing films are the ones that I grew up with. You know, like I've shared this story a million times on our podcast. The thing that got me into horror was well, when I was a kid, I used to have really terrible nightmares. Like really, really bad ones that would cause my whole body to seize up, and I'd be like in a waking nightmare. And that problem plagued me until I was like 5 or 6. And then my cousin, who was basically like a sister to me, and she played a lot of tricks on me as a kid, and she you know, as a typical, you know, older sister figure would. And she thought that I would get a kick out of watching A Nightmare on Elm Street when I was super, super young. And so she turned it on the TV, and she expected it to scare the hell out of me. And that movie taught me that you could fight back against something in your dreams. And so I have a deep affinity for that entire series. And that series is awful after like the first 2 films. But I love all of them. And so, I mean, those are amongst my favorites. Friday the 13th, that was just a pure, like, if I could, it was a no-no as a kid to watch those movies. And I think that was the other big appeal about some of the horror films that I grew up watching, was just like the more that my mom said I couldn't watch something, the more I wanted to watch it.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
I was
so,
in the same boat with that.
yeah, so I mean, it's just I think that's part of the call for horror movies with me, is that they were kind of like a taboo growing up, especially as a kid in the 80s, when we were stuck in that Reagan era of just politics, where everything was getting censored. You know, think about like the effects of like Mortal Kombat on the video game universe, and just like you know, just the when films literally only had G and PG ratings, and all the content that used to slide into those things before they introduced, you know, the MPA introduced R and NC-17 and X, and all the bouncing between all that, and just all the shit that we saw as a kid. Like, there were tits in James Bond, and some of those films were rated PG. Like,
That's because PG-13 didn't exist, and the idea that you can say like, all right, this is suitable for a 12-year-old but not for a 13-year-old,
right.
or vice versa, is insane.
Yeah, and it's one of those bizarre things, especially like the deeper you go back into film history, and you realize that like all these movies existed in like this black and white rating system, and all the stuff that we got to see as a kid that you wouldn't be able to see even in PG-13 movies these days. Like, could you imagine some of the stuff that happened in like the original Indiana Jones films happening now in PG-13 movies?
Oh no.
that whole like Temple of Doom scene. There's no way that would fly in a PG-13 movie these days.
Dude, his face melting off fucked with me for a while.
Yeah, there was just so
terrifying.
yeah, but I mean, it's not just that. Like, think about like animated films. There was like Secret of Nim. Like, you guys remember that movie? That movie had so much violence in it.
Well, so my 16th birthday, I think it was either my 16th birthday or my 18th birthday. My sister bought me a copy of Fritz the Cat.
Oh well, that was X-rated when it came
was
out.
X-rated when it came out, but the fact that they're doing shit like that in animated movies, and then you look at some of the stuff that they did get away with, like what you said with Secrets and Nim, it's crazy.
Yeah. I've always kind of had just this bizarre attraction to I guess the dark side of filmmaking, and not just that, but like what you can do on such a small budget. I mean, when you look at effects artists like Tom Savini, or what directors like Sam Raimi did with or Toby Hooper with Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you're talking a budget of maybe a couple $100,000, and they turn around and make millions and rock the whole world and cause controversy and all these things, but they're also revered. Like, they're films that are genuine gems because of what they've captured on screen. I guess that's part of the reason that I love it so much, is just there's this horror in general, even in this day and age, and the reason it remains so successful is because it's such a low budget thing, and the amount of shit that you can get away with and the amount of shit that you can do, it's like a form of technology that exists within filmmaking itself. Like, horror pushes the boundaries of filmmaking just like technology does these days, and in this day and age, and keeps us going forward because of the fact that, like, inherently, if you're making a horror movie, you are hyper limited. There's no studio that's ever going to give you a huge budget to make a horror film, because the returns on it need to be massive.
Do you feel that sometimes that can be detrimental to the industry as well, because horror films tend to be low budget? There does seem to be, maybe I can't think of it now, but because obviously COVID times and not much stuff is being pushed out.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like horror is a genre more than others that tend to be like a wave of films that'll come out, and a lot of them will be super low budget and super shitty.
Mm-hmm.
Like do you notice that too? Do you see that a lot because of the it's not necessarily a barrier to entry, but because a lot of those films can tend to be lower budget?
I mean, it's one of those double-edged swords. I think there's something really special about being told, hey, this is your budget for the film. It's nothing. See what you're capable of.
Is a big budget for a horror movie is what, about 20 million? That's considered big budget.
These in this day and age, yeah. If like Blumhouse does a film, I think the last
they
Halloween
try to keep it like 8 to 12.
Yeah, somewhere around there. And so it's like one of those things. You get horror directors that make masterpieces on 800 grand, and then their next film, they're given carte blanche to do whatever the hell they want, and then their next film's just awful. And part of it is because they had to struggle to come up with something creative to overcome their budget issues. And I think sometimes when you give somebody a blank check, it creates problems. And I think you see that even with major blockbusters. It's not just something that exists within horror itself. Like what was the name of that Disney movie that came out a few years back that was like about it was like Gods and Monsters or something like that, or whatever. Like, that was like one of the biggest box office bombs that existed in like
there's
history.
Been a bunch of them. There's like, I know there was like 2 or 3 of them that came out at the same time that were super expensive. One of them was Jupiter Ascending.
I remember that.
One of them, and I was really upset by this. It was the guy that did The Fifth Element, his movie that he'd been trying to get made for like 15 years.
with Dane DeHaan in it.
Yes.
Yeah, that one, like, big budget, massive flop.
Yeah, so I mean, like, budget doesn't necessarily dictate the film, and I think to people that kind of have that mentality, that are like, oh, we don't want to watch horror movies because they're always so low budget. I mean, we have trudged through a lot of shit with the podcast. We've seen a lot of really low budget films, some of which are fan submitted, some of which are recommended to us by people who do nothing but love low budget films. And I have to say, like, the one redeeming factor that spans across almost all of them, and we were actually just talking about this a little bit last week, is the fact that say what you will about them, they tend to be a little more original. It's not a play on the same ideas. Yeah, you get
bankrupt in what can often be a bankrupt ideas industry. However, does tend to have more originality to it than some of the other genres.
It does and it doesn't. I mean, there's definitely a whole bunch of tropes, and they exist for a reason, and they have come to define what horror movies are, I think, in this day and age, especially stuff like slasher films and your typical monster movies and that kind of thing. But honestly, it's one of those, if you're willing to trudge through a lot of bullshit, you find some gems, you find some stuff in the rough that really makes you sit back and be like, this person just needs to be discovered, you know? And I think that's one of the other big pleasures of watching horrors is it's just like listening to, I don't know. The only other thing that I can really compare it to, and they're kind of two sides of the same coin, is like heavy metal music. Like, a lot of people are like, oh, you know, why do you listen to the stuff with so much screaming in it? Or why do you watch stuff with so much gore in it? And it's just like, well, look, I put it on a scale of the best allegory I've come up with is spicy food. Some people really love spicy food, and some people like it more mild. The mild stuff is for everybody.
Cannot take it.
Yeah, the mild stuff is for everybody, and the spicy stuff isn't for everybody. But the spicy stuff also, like, has so much flavor, has so much of a reason to exist, that it's great that it does exist for the people that enjoy it, you know. And I guess that's really the biggest takeaway for it, and why I love the genre so much. It's just,
I think that's a solid analogy. I'm happy you brought up metal. I'm going to take this brief moment, as we discussed earlier. We're going to take a brief pause and rejoin momentarily. All right, we are back with the second half of this. We did not mean to cut off, but by no means did Zoom make me do that. So we're back here with Dime Store John Constantine and our guests Sam Berson and Palmer Sturman of InPodnito. And we were talking about the horror movies in the first half. And Palmer, you brought up metal, which is, again, a subject I am just completely and utterly bankrupt on. But hopefully, and if I got this right, you guys are also in a metal band called Holden, correct?
yeah.
I do know something. Excellent. And your last album came out a couple months ago called Ursa Minor. Is that correct?
Yeah. It was more of an EP, I think, than a full-on album, although it has the length of a full-on album.
We have a tendency to do that.
Yeah.
You guys go full on. No one's going to complain about the length. So, double threat here, unless you guys juggle or something else for the triple. It's impressive. So you guys host the horror podcast and you're in a band. Did the band come first, or did that come out of the love for each other in this podcast?
Sam, I talked way too long in this last one. You can take this one away.
So the band did come first, and I guess this iteration of the band, I think, came after the podcast. But Palmer and I have been playing music together almost as long as we've known each other. We met through a mutual friend of ours. 7 or 8 years ago at this point.
Longer than that, man. I've been here for going
we met.
on.
We met right before my 25th birthday. So yeah, I guess about almost 9 years ago.
Yeah. Jesus, I've been in Richmond a third of my freaking life, man.
Welcome. It's like a weird black hole. Yeah.
Where are you from beforehand?
What's that?
You said a third of your life. Where else are you from?
Man, I've been all over the place. My mom was a flight attendant, so I kind of got to grow up all over the world, but I spent most of my life in Northern Virginia.
Gotcha.
So he more or less grew up with my wife.
Oh. Yeah. I knew Mary Beth.
Like we met at his wedding.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and she's been a friend of mine since like first grade.
Yeah.
So she's the gift that keeps on giving, because you got your partner in crime here as well.
Yeah. So, and as far as the music goes, like Palmer and I, we started playing music together probably about 8 years ago. Went through a bunch of different iterations, wrote a whole bunch of different stuff, released a self-recorded record that we did with a guy that I know here in town, Pedro Aida, at his studio, Audio Verite, which is over in Lakeside. And that one that came out, I guess, probably like 5 years ago.
Yeah,
It feels
about
like.
5 years ago, I think.
Coincidentally, the day after we finished recording, our drummer moved back to Vermont.
Yep.
Which I guess started the chain of events of us never being able to hold down a drummer. I think he was the longest tenured drummer we had at that point. And then we went through like 3 or 4 more before we found the guy that we worked with and continue to work with for Holden. And it's, so name change, sound change. We got a little bit more serious and focused this time around, and we're continuing to, focus going forward. But yeah, it's been a lot of on and off time playing music with Palmer.
Yeah. It was like one of those. So Danny, the mutual friend of ours, that kid can play guitar. And I guess he used to regularly jam with Sam, and so he found out I played guitar, and he was like, "Hey, we should all just get together and jam." And one thing led to another, and we were in a space just throwing down.
Yeah, we shared a practice space with 3 other bands.
Yeah, 3 other bands. It was one of the most cramped rooms I think I've ever been in my life. And I don't. Danny kind of he likes metal, but he wasn't quite into what Sam and I were trying to do, and so he kind of branched off and did his own thing. And I he just plays guitar and does like open mic nights and stuff these days.
He's a lot more like singer-songwriter type stuff.
Yeah, wherever he can play wagon wheel, he's acceptable. And so Sam and I continued to jam, and yeah, we went through drummer after drummer after drummer after drummer. And it was beginning to look like a hopeless situation, and then finally we met Mike, our current drummer, and Mike was we had him in. He was a Craigslist meet, and we were beginning to give up on Craigslist because we got a number of different characters in and out of Craigslist, and it was just one nightmare after another.
You like nightmares, though, right?
Yeah, not those kind of nightmares.
You're waking up in a bathtub filled with ice, less one kidney now?
Yeah, nothing like that. It was just colorful characters, people that had either egos the size of Everest, or I don't know, just all sorts of just bizarre stuff.
You know those moments where, or the stories you've heard of people like grossly misrepresenting themselves on like a job application? We got a lot of those.
Yeah, we got a lot of those. And so Mike strolled in, and we jammed on one track in particular. We had sent him a recording, and he was the first drummer that came in with material for that recording prepared. And so that immediately kind of opened our eyes. And then we found out he had already had like a bit of a professional history as a metal drummer. He'd toured with a couple other bands. He'd done some recording with a couple other bands. And so it was one of those things where Sam and I just kind of looked at each other and we were like, oh shit, this guy's like serious business.
He might be 70 years old, but that's
yeah.
But at least he's serious.
What's that?
But at least he's serious. That's heart attack being 70, but yeah.
And so it's like, it was one of those, he ended up being a little bit of a blessing in disguise, because as much as Mike and I butted heads during the writing of our album, he kept me grounded and me focused, and we got the material out the door and recorded. And I think it's some of the proudest stuff that Sam and I have done yet. You know, it's one of those things. He also coincidentally fucking moved
Right after we
Well, that's
recorded
cool.
the album.
yeah. But it was one of those versus our other drummer who was fantastic, and I love the guy. He was a great drummer. The difference between him and the other one we had that we recorded with is the fact that when he left, it didn't feel like it was the end of things. We kind of are looking at trying to get stuff recorded. It's a bit more of a challenge now because we can't meet in person as often, but he does a lot of traveling. And he, you know, we've still got the practice space. He can still kind of make appearances here and there, but we're in the process of basically figuring out how to kind of record things on our own so we can bounce ideas back and forth and look at how we can progress forward. And so it didn't feel like the end of a chapter, it just felt like the start of a new one.
Yeah.
And so we're in the process of writing the next one. There's already some material that we've got, well, that I've got ready to go. I've just got to kind of record it and send it off to Sam and Mike and start the ball rolling on that. And I don't know, it'll be a new venture. It was one of those, we were kind of bouncing the idea of trying to do some live shows, and then COVID hit, and that kind of put a damper on everything. But I think
Live shows just immediately ended.
yeah, right. So because we wrote, yeah, let me tell you, releasing a self-funded album in the middle of a pandemic is not a way to get album sales.
It's a great financial decision. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. We I think we had some pretty good success actually. We a lot of our stuff aired on like multiple podcasts. We did like the metal circuit with like the underground metal circuit with a lot of our stuff. We had some pretty good response. We had some bad response too. But it was one of those, like, the bad responses.
Most of the criticism, like the bad criticism we got, came across as like it's not my cup of tea kind of stuff.
Was
Yeah.
there anything constructive in there though? Was there anything that you can kind of like take and use moving forward? Did you get any of that? Because I know sometimes, especially like online, or if somebody's just making comments or something, they could just be assholes for the sake of being assholes.
I'd say a lot of it was pretty constructive, to be honest. I mean, aside from like one review that were literally like she didn't like it because it really just wasn't for her, and that was kind of it.
And she even said at the end that like she typically listens to like pop music, which is fine. But if that's what you listen to, I don't know why you're reviewing this.
Right, right. Yeah, it was like most of the other bad stuff was actually pretty helpful, and it was stuff that was like politely phrased, and at least, you know, there was a track or two that they said that they dug, and out of a 4-track album, you know, it's I don't consider that a bad thing. It was the whole process was a learning experience. It was the first time that I had done those kinds of vocals. It's one of those things that kind of opened my eyes to maybe the fact that going forward, I think I want to do more rhythm and less lead, and focus on rhythm and vocals, and see if we can maybe bring in a fourth member down the road to do more lead stuff.
I play kazoo. I'm down.
Can you bust out a sick kazoo solo though?
That's my musical career right there.
There you go. Hey, we can. First off, that sounds like it would fit right in. And second, I won't say no to anybody. It was one of those. It was just one of those kind of things we got in the studio. I had some lyrics written. There were some songs where just everything fell into place, and there were a couple tracks where Mike had to pull me aside and be like, "This isn't working. We got to figure out something else." And we kind of like sat down and hashed it out. And one of the best things about Mike is I have a huge pride complex when it comes to stuff that I've written, and I hate it when somebody tries to say, "No, this needs to get rearranged, or this needs to get shifted." And there were many nights spent where Mike and I were just, you know, button heads. And I have to say, first off, that motherfucker put up with it. Which is
you almost. I do recall there was. I don't remember exactly what track it was, but I know you almost walked out at one point.
Yeah, I was real heated. There were a couple
Well,
nights I was
because
real heated.
I'd have. It's honestly been a while since I've listened to the record myself. But it was the one track where like we kept trying to get you to just drop one note that you were playing.
Yeah.
To make it like
I
make more
remember the
sense.
night.
Yeah.
I remember the fucking night.
Well, the funniest, like the weirdest thing about it, and again, like Palmer would come in. Palmer wrote most of the stuff, and he would come in with it and play it, and Mike and I would just kind of tear it apart and rearrange it, say this works, this doesn't. What if we added this or moved this? And then once Palmer stopped yelling at us that we're fucking up his songs, and he would play through it, we would figure out the rest of it, and we'd figure out what we're playing. But I just like just like Palmer said, when we got into the studio, and there were some things that just fell right into place, and some things that didn't. There was a whole section of the end of one of the tracks that Mike and I had been playing the same way for months, and we got into the studio, and it's a completely different experience.
Justified.
It's
so justified at this point.
It's a completely different experience because we're in our practice space. It's a glorified practice space. It's a fucking storage unit over in Lakeside.
Yeah.
So not exactly the greatest sound quality in the world, but tons of bands use that particular facility as their practice spaces because it's dirt cheap and they don't care what time of day you're there. So we get up to the studio, and Mike has the first weekend all to himself, and he's just doing all the drums that first weekend. I go up that Saturday just to kind of hang out and watch. And he gets to the song, and it's like it's the first time either one of us actually heard what Palmer was playing in this part. And so he comes out of the recording room, and the two of us just sit down for like an hour trying to figure out how to rewrite the end of what we're doing for this song.
Keep in mind, for like 6 months, I had been saying that what they were doing sounded like shit, and, and that it wasn't going to work with what I was doing.
Yeah. So, and that's been the greatest thing about working with Mike, working with Palmer, is just no matter what we're writing and who's writing what, and yeah, we all have our egos and we're all particular about like certain things that we're doing. Like, we also know that if you yell at each other enough and just call each other stupid enough, we'll finally shut up and listen.
Oh,
it's true.
Because like we all have egos, but we also know that none of us are important.
You're all equally important.
Well, it's like one of those, like, collectively we are what makes it work. And I think once there might be nights where we walk out hating each other, but we give it, another week or so, and then we'll come back in and have fresh perspectives on it, and I'll concede to Mike, or, Sam will concede to me, or Mike will throw a fit in a corner until he makes it seem like nobody conceded to him. But it's one of those, unless we're all rolling together, it doesn't mesh. And I think we all realize that collectively at the end of the day. And I think pretty much every other band goes through shit like this. I mean, like every other band that I've ever talked to have been like, oh yeah, our so-and-so, this, he's the songwriter and he's the egotist of the band. But really it's just one of those, like, you come in with something that you hear one way, and it's difficult when you've been jamming on it, you've been playing it for a while. And somebody says, why don't we try it this way? When you hear it so dead set in your head for a month, the way that you've been arranging things, then somebody says we should arrange it this way. It's a little hard to take at first, but it's one of those.
You have a vision, and if somebody's trying to change that, it's hard to take any type of change.
Yeah. So then it turns.
And you've been sitting on it, and you have what it is in your head.
Yeah, exactly.
Palmer wants to maintain that he is the Zack Snyder, and that his vision is the glorious vision.
It is, but it's often wrong, and I admit to that. Yeah, exactly. It's overrated. It's overrated.
I got to work. The only taste of collaboration I actually have is with Sam on a podcast project I worked on a couple years ago. I think I don't remember if you were in a band at the time too. Like I'm gonna butcher it. You were in like Lapis or what was
Lapis.
it?
Lapis. Yeah, that was our previous iteration.
I thought it might have been. Yeah, I had a comic book and comic book TV podcast called Speechbox, and Sam was the sound engineer on that. And I mean, I got along really well, doing that. I think the only time in very, very minor issues or anything is we had a guy, Patrick, who did video. And I think sometimes he thought things should go a certain way in terms of production. And you did things kind of the way, you needed to do or wanted to get things out. But smaller scale project, not a lot of people's egos or things really involved in that. Sam has fond memories.
Yeah, I mean it's just working together. I mean, that was fun. I was thinking about Speechbox the other day, because I think that was either right before or right around the time that InPodnito started. I think. I don't know.
Was it? Yeah, I guess so.
Don't take my word for it, because every day feels like a week. So I have no idea.
Down that I was the inspiration for InPodnito.
Yes, you were, which is why I immediately said, Palmer, you're editing everything.
I could not do this podcast, or at least get it out as well as I have, so without Palmer, because Palmer has on this podcast and the one that I was doing before, my baseball podcast, Palmer has saved my ass by resizing logos so I could actually get on things like iTunes and Google Play and just anything else that adamantly hates any design anyone makes me.
It's true. When you've come to me with these things, I have graciously assisted. No, it's been a pleasure helping you with those things, man. It's I acknowledge how hard some of this shit is to get off the ground and how much of a labor of love it is. And when you run into a speed bump as simplistic as that, it's one of those, it can be a little bit disheartening. So I get it. I'm glad to help you with anything you ever need on these.
I appreciate all the love and camaraderie, and it's just, looking and seeing everything that you guys do. And obviously, Palmer, you with a child, and Sam, you expecting, it's going to probably, is it hard to balance everything, to do all the things that you love to do and obviously spend time with your significant others? Palmer, balancing being a dad too. The real world aspect of this is, you guys have a lot of things that you're dedicated to. How do you make time for all this type of stuff?
You gotta kind of set priorities, right? So it's one of those, like, in our case, especially with the podcast, it was one of those, we had a moment where we recorded an episode where it felt like all the wind had been sucked out of our sails by the end of it. And I think collectively, the three of us looked at each other and we were like, we need to take a break. So we announced to everybody that we were taking a break. And I think we went on like a 2-month hiatus, something like that.
Yeah, thereabouts.
And it might have been even a little bit longer than that. And it was just one of those, we let everybody know, and all the social media accounts, look, like, we're going to have to step away. We've got to collectively, like, you were going through a lot of shit with your family life. I had just had, Atticus had just been born. And it was one of those, we, and Alex had just had Silas, and it was just one of those, we collectively were like, let's take some time to gather our thoughts. We'll come back to this. And if it's still something that we want to do, then we'll keep it going. And I think all three of us, after taking a little bit of time off, had realized that it is something that we still wanted to continue with. It did feel, at least to me, I can only speak from personal experience, it did feel like there was a bit of a hole left when we had taken our hiatus. And so it was one of those, we reevaluated things. We decided, hey, like, what will work with our schedule? And that was when we decided, if we can just release an episode every other week and make it more long form and focus on continuing the I guess the structure of the episodes that we had previously. We were kind of, so before we were doing weekly episodes that were maybe an hour and a half long, and I'd do a hard cutoff kind of around that mark. I would say, hey, we got to wrap this up. So part of the issue was we weren't able to kind of like talk about things and share all our thoughts on things as much as we wanted to. And now it's just like, all bets are off. We get together every other week. The length of the podcast tends to be around 2.5 hours, and believe it or not, people listen. I mean, like as with any podcast, even when we were doing it just for an hour or an hour and a half, we had people that would only listen to the first 20 minutes, and that was it. But like the retention I've noticed has been not increased, but it's about the same since we moved over to the 2.5 hour mark. We've got the fans that listen to the entire thing, and then they respond to us, they email us, they let us know their thoughts. And I realized kind of with that, like, this is how you balance your personal life and the passion projects that you have on the side is you figure out a way to make them work around your schedule. And you say to yourself, look, if you can balance these things, if you can figure out a way to do it, then you continue forward. And if you can't, then obviously, you have to give it the axe. But it's one of those, if it's enough of a passion, then it's not something that should be that hard to do. And I think kind of pushing the time back, making sure we had enough time to still approach things with the depth that we like to approach things was the biggest key to success.
Yep.
And this month, it's been a little bit more of a struggle because we've been kind of bouncing back to trying to pump out a whole bunch of content. This month, we're releasing more content than we normally do, but we kind of do that every October. If I'm honest, this is always our most successful month. We always get tons of new listeners, and this is the way that we kind of, because everybody's in the mood for horror stuff and in the mood for spooky stuff around this time of year. And so, we're doing a lot more interviews. We're doing a lot more, for instance, appearing with you on this, and
we did our first Twitch game.
Yeah, we did our first live stream.
You're playing a horror game, right?
Yeah. Don't Get Stabbed. Which was fun. It was just a little card game that ended up being a lot of fun. But so this month has been a little bit more high octane than a couple of the months past have been. But things will return back to normal. Things will get easier again. And like I said, ultimately, if you're doing something like this, it should be because you enjoy doing it, not because it feels like a chore.
And that's the biggest takeaway that I know I'm kind of speaking for Alex here a little bit, but when we took our hiatus, all three of us were just kind of worn out. We're pumping out stuff every single week. And we had talked about it a bunch, just, getting drunk, sitting around a bonfire. And a lot of it was, we wanted to go back to having fun. And it felt like for a while we weren't having fun.
Yeah, it felt like a research project almost every week. Like it was like it was like back to college, right? Like you had this crushing term paper coming up every week.
Yeah.
Where we'd have to do all this research, and we have to sound, for lack of a better way to phrase it, we had to sound like we knew what we were talking about. And
I never worry about that when I
but when you do something like what we're doing, it's you have to do your research. You have to be able to say, this is what the cinematography is like, this is what the movie is like, this is what this actor has been in, what this director has done previously, and then tie it all in with the rest of the horror, ether. And it's just one of those, it became a burden.
Yeah.
And as soon as we figured out a way to stop it from feeling like that, I feel like everything became much better again.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. I mean, to be honest, I stopped doing that baseball podcast I was doing last year because I was doing it with a rotating group of other people, and I was having fun. I loved, sitting around BSing about sports with my bros. But like it became too much of a burden to like, all right, I need to get at least one other person to do this with me, because me just rattling off stats and stuff for an hour is going to get really monotonous.
Yeah.
So I stopped doing podcasts for about a year, and I was like, I miss the conversations. And then granted, I don't exactly do it the greatest way humanly possible, but I miss the conversation. So just being able to do this kind of format where I can just have, like cool people like you guys on and talk and learn something, because I don't know jack about horror, I don't know anything about metal, so it's genuinely interesting when you can speak to people that are, one, with the podcast, doing something to a better degree. You guys do an amazing job with your podcast, but like I learn from what you guys do, and then learning about, the horror genre, something that, I'm a little bit lacking in, or, hearing about how you guys have your band. I love these conversations, and that's, I think, the best part, at least for me, doing this particular podcast. And it never feels like a burden. It feels like it fills a void that I have, if any of that makes sense.
I think that's the key to any of this, right? Is if you're going to put out any sort of art, because as much as people might like to disagree, podcast is a bit of an art form. Like you got to have the passion for it first and foremost. The second it starts to feel like I said, a chore, it becomes a hack job. And yeah, so I guess that's ultimately the answer to your question is in order to balance it, you just need to make sure that your energy is still in it and figure out a way to keep yourself running on all cylinders, while being able to tend to the things that are obviously more important.
Yeah. I think also, don't be afraid to change. Like, I mean, just with our podcast alone, we've gone through probably 3 versions of it. Yeah. Between name changes and formats and things like that. And, you said that, like, as good as our stuff sounds now, like, go back and listen to our stuff even towards the end of the first year. So, like, episodes in the 50s and 60s sound like absolute dog shit comparatively, because we're a lot of it's just kind of learn as you go. And, our music's the same way. And, Palmer and I both work in tech. Like, it's the same thing there. If anything that I did 3 years ago is exactly the same as I'm doing now, then I'm just resting on my laurels, and it's a big issue.
Yeah. And I mean, like, it's one of those things. Like, I'll go back 20 episodes ago and think it sounds awful because I'm continuously tweaking and learning new things. And we were kind of joking around earlier about using GarageBand versus something more expensive, and I forked over the money for Logic Pro when I built my last MacBook, and it's been this one daunting thing that's been, like, kind of luring over me since I purchased it, because it's like, it is a powerful piece of software that I end up kind of leaving in the background because GarageBand does everything so much more efficiently and much more streamlined. Whereas I know Logic will do things better, but I need to learn how to use it. And so it's like, it's one of those, you're trying to find time to kind of push yourself to learn new things and become better at what you're doing but I feel like you never do that, right? Like, you are your own biggest critic. No matter what, you're always going to keep trying to make yourself sound better or make your stuff better in the best way possible. And like you said, Sam, I mean, the second you kind of find yourself just looking at your past stuff and realizing it's the same as what you're doing now is the day that you realize you're doing something wrong. At least with us. And it's one of those things, like, I think even with us kind of falling back to the bi-weekly format, it's just every single time I listen to past episodes and I look at what we're doing, I'm trying to figure out a way to make it better. I'm trying to hone the script. I'm trying to figure out how to add more jokes or when to kind of, like, edit things so it sounds more natural. Do I remove the in this sentence? Do I let it stand? Is this too much laughing? Is it too little laughing? Like, it's this weird fine balance that you try to find with sharing too much and too little with your audience. And it's something that I'm still trying to learn how to master. I don't know that I ever will. I don't know that any podcast has ever truly mastered it.
No, it's a tough balance. It's absolutely a tough balance, but I think that's overall good advice. We've bounced between creative processes, talking about your podcast, talking about the band. I know we've kind of gone all over the place, but is there anything, that we didn't touch on, before we wrap up that, you really want to get out there, or that, you want people to know about you or about any these endeavors that you guys have?
Not personally. The biggest takeaway from all this is check out our podcast, Terror InPodnito. You can Find it on pretty much every single major social media platform. We don't have a fucking TikTok. We will never have a fucking TikTok. But Instagram.
I'm not cool enough to have a TikTok.
Yeah, that's really what it comes down to. We are way too boomer to have a TikTok. So yeah, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, those are our main staples. I think I'm more active on Twitter than anything else. I manage all the social media. So
Yeah.
it's one of those, I'll post the occasional Instagram photo, but it's rare. Facebook and Twitter are more where I tend to kind of open the door. Follow us on there, check out our website, check out our stuff. We are very open to feedback. We had somebody not too long ago tweet at us that we had a bitchin' podcast, but we need to stop talking over one another. And I think we kind of like take these things to heart. We try to improve. All that matters to us is feedback and tell us how we can get better at what it is that we're doing. If you're listening and if you're enjoying, then that's all that matters to us. You can check out Holden. I think it's either Holden or Holden Official on pretty much every platform.
Yeah, it's also we're on Bandcamp.
Yep.
judgeholden.bandcamp.com, where you can spend $5 to get it digitally or $17 to get this super duper dope vinyl. Where also a collab crossover. Palmer, I think, found the artist for this through our podcast.
Yeah,
who did our cover work. Yeah.
Awesome.
I don't know the guy's name. Palmer probably does. If not, I'm sure he can find it. But yeah, this bad boy's $17 also available.
Yeah. Honestly, it's one of those things. Check it out. If you like it, awesome. I'm really happy. And that's really all I care for. The money is all secondary. Like we don't do any of these things to get profit from them.
First, the record is on Spotify and iTunes and everywhere else. So like you can listen to it for free. And we treat it the same way that we treat the podcast. It'd be cool if one day we made money off of it, but we're realistic. That's why we have jobs.
Exactly. It's all labor of love. So, check it out. Let us know what you think. If you dig it, that's great. If you don't, hopefully you find something that you will. That's my take on it.
See, that's how I know you're a dad now. You didn't used to be that nice about it.
Yeah, well, that is what it is.
I will leave out everything in the descriptions on Facebook, on Podbean, on YouTube. So it should be super easy for anybody watching or listening to be able to click through and, get the album, check out your podcast, and you guys do amazing stuff. And I will get one of the albums as well. And when I get it, I will hawk it in the midst.
Awesome.
Thank you. I am nothing if not a snake oil salesman. No, I'm kidding.
That's the perfect year for that.
No, it's
been a good 4 years for that.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much for spending the time coming on my podcast. Sam, I know you have a Braves game that you are.
Hey, we're winning right now. It's okay. Like I said, I have it on in the background over here.
Yeah, I've seen it reflecting off your bald head.
Yep.
I was wondering what that was.
This white spot right here, that's the screen over here.
I always wear, so my normal garb, if you've seen the other podcasts or if you've seen anything, I'm normally wearing a t-shirt and one of my Yankees hats.
Yep. You can't really wear that Yankees hat right now.
I can. Not thrilled, but I can. But yeah, that's why I was like, oh, Halloween. I'll throw together a comic costume. Oh, horror. John Constantine.
There you go.
All that's left me is feeling very underdressed.
That's awesome. Guys, THEJHirsch, Holden, Sam, Palmer, thank you so much. You guys have a happy Halloween, and hopefully the rest of the year is tremendous for you guys.
Hey, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Jeremy, for having us.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Guys, they'll be back. I maybe mentioning that as a threat. I don't know. Just
hey, if you don't regret us having us on the first time, then yes, we will be back.
Hey everybody, I know it's a drastic costume change. Oh, yeah, maybe not, but it's a not continual as we had the podcast. I was in my crappy John Constantine cosplay-esque thing going on, and now I'm in my home office with my random assortment of pops behind me, probably a better location than with my living room stairs normally behind me. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that episode with Sam and Palmer, tremendous guys from InPodnito. and I will have the link to their podcast and social in the description down below, so you can check those guys out. Obviously, this week's Halloween, so awesome time to check out all things spooky and horror-y, right? Did I say horror-y or horror-y? You know what I meant. Either way, it's good. But main reason why some of you are here, besides to listen to my dulcet tones and the awesome interview that I just had, is to see who wins the Baby Yoda. Who I am shamelessly shaking here. I know you guys got to see my wife's rally cry to the contest on Sunday. Where I'm recording this now, it is a little bit past 8:30, and had to see how the little spinny wheel worked and did some tests and worked tremendous. So hopefully that's still the case. So without further ado, I'm going to try this screen share. I know you're excited to still see my head floating around in the corner. I work best as a disembodied voice, in all honesty. So we are going to spin the wheel and see who wins the Baby Yoda. I want to thank everybody who does like the podcast on facebook.com/pointofjew. Everybody who subscribed on YouTube. Many of you did subscribe as hidden, so I had no idea who you were. So there's like 5 or 6 people from YouTube who YouTube notified me subscribed to the podcast. But we'll do more stuff on YouTube in the future for you guys to win things too. Just because I know sometimes changing settings and doing this or that is super confusing, or at least not direct, so it's not great. And huge thank you to the ballsiest person in the contest, Max Wilson. Max was the only one to do the Wookiee noise. So sad to say that many of you do not have a future as a fuzzy space alien, as a space furry. No, that's not right. That's not even remotely right. All right. So let's make the deal and spin the wheel. Oh, it makes many clicky noises. That's very good. Who is the winner Yoda dinner? You wouldn't eat him. Jerome Brooks has won the Baby Yoda. Jerome, I will reach out to you on Facebook and let you know that you won the Baby Yoda. And if for some reason, if anybody doesn't want the thing, I'll redraw on another show. But I will get that to you through whatever methodologies you would like. So thanks everybody for liking and doing, and I will have more giveaways in the future. I promise. As nothing more than a way to lure you to keep listening to the show on a consistent basis. But congrats, Jerome. And thanks again to the guests tonight, Sam and Palmer from InPodnito. That was fun. I hopefully didn't show too much of my film ignorance on horror in that podcast, because that is definitely the genre I am least familiar with. But I would almost guarantee that those guys will be on the podcast again in the future. Just as we touched on, they've helped me tremendously. Sam was a part of Speechbox when I used to do that comic-based podcast. Palmer's helped me with logos and stuff to actually put this thing out on iTunes and Google Play. So they're definitely a huge help, and they're wonderful guys. And hopefully we'll get together and I can learn some more stuff to make the podcast better all the time. If there's any comments or anything from you guys, definitely leave them on Facebook, on YouTube. I appreciate any kind of feedback. Just telling me I suck, I'm always well aware of that. So just anything, good criticism is always something to look forward to. If you're not subscribed on iTunes or Spotify or Google Podcasts, go do that so you can be notified when new episodes drop, which is typically Tuesdays. I know this one will be, and all the previous ones, and pretty much all the subsequent ones. Like us on facebook.com/pointofjew and subscribe on YouTube. And probably will do something more with YouTube, I think, for the next giveaway, because I need 100 to get a custom channel. I know you're staying up at night thinking, why can't I just go to youtube.com/pointofjew? And I'd love you to. But until next time, I hope every single one of you has a wonderful Halloween. Hopefully it's not too scary, or as scary as you need it to be. 2020 is pretty scary. So until next time, guys, have a great one. Thank you.